Just hitting the cool. Well, welcome everybody to the Forest Business Alliance grant closeout workshop. There's a lot of grants closing out in the next few months and year or so for folks. So we thought we'd offer some advice and insight and also have a chance for discussion for questions and the like at the end of the hour. But we're gonna go through can you go to the next slide, please, Chris? We're going to go through the presentation in about 20 minutes or so. Chris, Regine, and I, all of us with the Forest Business Alliance, are going to present. And just one caveat or one kind of overarching theme here is that grant closeout, kind of like grant administration or grant management, isn't the most exciting thing in the world with projects, but you can kind of switch that around and kind of look at ways to make it worthwhile and leverage the products or the information that you put together and make it a learning opportunity for your business, your organization, and also look at it as a way to interact with the funder or the donor in the case of other projects, and hopefully use it as a springboard for other funding for with them or with others. So really quickly, we'll go around the room, do introductions, just say your name and who you're with. I'm Vance Russell. I have my own business called 3 XYZ, and I'm with the Forest Business Alliance. I'll hand it over to Chris.
And
Morning, everyone. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when people introduce themselves, can you guys just state when your CAL FIRE grants expire, just so we can kind of get an understanding of
Good
where
idea.
you're
Thanks.
at? Thank you.
Yeah, good idea, Regine. Chris Sacco. I also have my own consulting business, Aegis Conservation, and I'm a member of the Forest Business Alliance. Over to you, Regine.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And sorry to interrupt. Regine Miller. I work for Headwaters Environmental. I'm part of the Forest Business Alliance team. Glad to be here today. Let's see, Jeremy, you're next on my screen.
All right, Jeremy Fisher with Forestry Collective, and my grant's officially done in April, but I'm actually done and gonna try to wrap it up with this grant report into January. DJ.
Good morning, everybody. My name is DJ Baker. I'm with the Yuba County Resource Conservation District, and our next CAL FIRE grant is due up here in the spring of 27. So getting a little bit of head start on it. Let's go with John.
Hey guys, John Azevedo with Forge Refuels. We make relocatable bioenergy equipment. Don't currently have a CAL FIRE grant, so I'm just here to listen in and see what I can learn, but I might be an outlier here.
Jean, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Jean Corbett with Northbridge Jobs with Justice. I'm the new grants coordinator. So it's my first time in one of these meetings. Happy to be here. Our CAL FIRE grant closes out. We're in partnership with the Resilience Force, and that closes out in December.
And Laurel.
Hi, I'm Laurel Hickey. I'm with the Sierra Institute, and our CAL FIRE grant ends in March, and it'll be the first time I'm doing a closeout, so I'm happy to be here.
And Jeff, I think you're the last person.
Yeah, hi, Jeff Grief, Plumas Wood Fiber. I had a CAL FIRE grant, which I used for a feasibility study. When the study was completed, I closed out the grant at that time, so I have no active grants at the moment with CAL.
Cool. So Jeff, when we don't know the answer to questions, you can help us answer them.
Maybe. We'll see.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. So Chris, next slide. Oh, sorry. So go. Sorry. we're going to talk just really briefly for those of you that may not be familiar what Forest Business Alliance is. We'll talk really briefly about grant amendments, and then get into closeout and finish off with questions. Next, please. So I think most of you are familiar with the Forest Business Alliance.
Sorry,
We provide technical assistance, workshop, and peer learning networks to increase local and regional capacity for forest sector businesses and organizations. We've been around for almost 2.5 years now. Our grant from CAL FIRE actually ends this March, so we're going to be doing closeout ourselves for this grant round. And we also have received funding from the Forest Service and Yuba Water Agency and some other funders as well. Next, please. So this is just a general timeline. This isn't. Chris is going to go into more detail on the closeout requirements and what CAL FIRE requires. But this is just a suggestion of, if your grant was closing out in March, what you should be thinking about, between now and March and kind of some of the items. The first one, if you're closing in March, you probably already should have submitted amendment paperwork in December or even November. So that probably shouldn't be January. But over the course of the next couple months, really grant closeout is, gathering up information, making sure you have all the metrics and the measurements that you promised that you would gather or track rather, and put those together, putting together the draft report with your project team, and then I'm probably going to sound like a broken record on this today, but really being thoughtful and careful about analyzing the results and processing that financial information, and maybe taking some time to learn from that. What went well, what didn't, what would you change, and put that into the final report. For the stuff that didn't go well, maybe don't put it in a negative fashion, but put it in a constructive manner. And then also be thinking about those assets and communications and other things that you might derive from that reporting and learning, to share with other donors, other folks that you work with, and other partners. Next, I think I'm turning it over to you at this point, Chris. Go ahead.
Yep. Right. Yeah. So we're starting with amendments because of the time-sensitive nature of these. If all amendments need to be submitted within 90 days of the agreement expiration date. So if you are expiring, if your grant ends in March, you sort of passed that. But for DJ and others who have grants that are ending later, just keep that in mind. Any amendment needs to be submitted within 90 days or 90 days or more before the end. Before you submit, the second thing is just before you submit a grant amendment, consult the manager on the CAL FIRE side before you do so. Don't surprise them with an amendment. The timing, we were talking about this earlier before this call, and they are happening faster at the moment, but it does take some time to process the amendments. Right now, they're running about a couple of weeks, but you should anticipate that it could be longer than that, just so you're not left in the lurch, because you can't, while the amendment is being processed, CAL FIRE won't accept any invoices until that amendment's approved. So that's why the timing and the invoicing are really important to consider together there. You should, along those same lines, you should get your amendments submit an invoice before you submit an amendment so that your cash flow isn't disrupted. And then if you want more on amendments, there's a grantee user guide provided by eCivis actually for CAL FIRE grantees. And that we have a link to that, which we'll share later in the chat. But that you can find more about amendments on pages 49 to 52 of that grantee user guide. This is the template that is provided to submit the amendments. You need to upload this amendment request letter. That's the template right there on the right-hand side of your screen. But you'll need to upload that letter into eCivis describing your amendment, the request. In that letter, you'll describe your original scope of work and then describe the requested changes and the reasons why you want to make those changes and the proposed changes to your budget. And the letter should follow that template. That's why they provided it, right? So you need to follow that template as closely as possible. Again, upload that to eCivis. And then I guess last but not least, when you must amend the budget table in eCivis as part of the proposed amendment, in addition to submitting this form. Let's see. I already covered the other points there. Anything you want to add to that, Regine? Just as you've done a number of these. I mean, we're talking about closeout right now, but amendment process can happen anytime during the grant. So you don't necessarily need to, it's relevant now, but it could be relevant at any time during your grant.
Yeah. No, the only thing I would just add is, for those whose grants do close out March 31st, 2026, the deadline to submit a final amendment has already passed. But for those whose grants expire later this year or even next year, just kind of bear this in mind. CAL FIRE will let you propose multiple amendments over the term of your grant, and really they want to see grantees successfully implement their projects and make effective and sort of the best use of your funding. So if you do have a change in your project scope or your budget, it's fine to propose an amendment. You cannot achieve any more funding than what you've been awarded, but you can shift funds between budget categories as long as you're generally within the spirit of your original scope of work and your project. And I would just kind of, in my experience, sometimes you may need to give your grant program manager a nudge because I don't know I think they've had some glitches with each eCivis as it relates to amendments. So just sort of that, as Chris mentioned earlier, letting your grant manager know you're planning to submit an amendment and then following up with them after you actually submit it. So you just flag it for them and they know you're waiting for their review and approval.
Great. Thanks, Regine. So are you ready to close out? We frame that as a question because as with the amendment process, I mean, once you've submitted your closeout, it's kind of frozen, right? You can't do anything else. You won't be able to submit further activity reports or complete any other tasks on the grant. So we just frame that as an upfront question because you need to make sure that you are indeed done, because all unspent funding also will be de-obligated and returned to the grantor, in this case, CAL FIRE, once you've closed out your grant. So just make sure you're done. Obviously, the timeline will dictate that in many circumstances, in many cases. But I think it was Jeremy who said, you're closing out kind of ahead of time, right? Before the grant agreement's actually done. So just make sure you're actually done is the point there. Brief overview of the process. There's two main components here. First, CAL FIRE will send you a document to complete. It's called the Project Closeout Report form. You need to obviously complete that form, and as part of that, you will also be able to upload or attach additional information. And this is important because the form itself is you don't have, there's very strict word counts on the form. So if you want to provide information in addition to what's kind of allowed in that template, then you can do so through attachments, right? And I think there is a limited number of attachments, but you can attach photographs. In many cases, you're required to attach photographs, for example, of grant-funded equipment and project-related events that have been funded by the grant. You can also attach outreach materials that have been produced by the project, such as press releases and news articles, screenshots of your project website, presentations you may have done, and reports you may have prepared, and then anything else that documents the project accomplishments. Those are things you could attach to the report. The second piece here is the closeout process on eCivis. Regine will cover this in detail later in the presentation, but this is really, actually, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slide too, but refer to the eCivis Grants Portal CAL FIRE Grantee User Guide, the one I mentioned earlier. They also have information about the closeout process and what you need to do, specific step-by-step instructions that will cover some of that, but you will, again, I can't do it right now, but maybe Regine, you can throw it, because I'm sharing my screen, that link that I've got in there in the chat so people can access that document if they don't have it already, or Vance, whoever. Again, once you've done the closeout on eCivis, once you've submitted it, that's it, right? You can't complete anything else, so make sure you're ready to actually press submit. When you've done both the project closeout report and the eCivis closeout process, CAL FIRE will receive that information, review it, and then notify you when the process is complete. You should also be able to check that on eCivis. It should, but you can wait for a notification, but you can also you can check your eCivis account to see if it's been closed out. This is the closeout report form. It's a brief 5-page document that, again, your grant manager will provide to you. You can either complete and submit your final financial report and an activity report on eCivis, then complete this closeout form, or you can request that your grant manager send you the form ahead of time and submit it at the same time you submit the final financial and activity reports on eCivis. So you can do either one, but I think it may make more sense to go ahead and ask for that ahead of time so you can be working on it to make sure it aligns with your eCivis information. That makes more sense from my perspective. The form requires that this form that's on the screen right now is basic project information, describing whether or not you've met your project goals and objectives that are outlined in the grant agreement. And then it also asks you, and not all the pages are on the screen right now because it's a 5-page document. It also just asks you to describe the project co-benefits, which we had a workshop on that a year or so ago. And you can tie your descriptions of the co-benefits back to the ones listed in your grant application and your progress reports. But it's the goals and objectives and the co-benefits. And then, like I said earlier, you can append or attach additional information to that to flesh out whatever your project accomplishments you've reported. These are some general best practices when doing reports. And you should consider these when you're thinking about, again, the project closeout process in the report form that we just showed you. Get organized before you start writing or in preparing the report. Specifically, review the granted commitments, the goals, the approved budget, the expenditures to date. Have that all on hand and review it all before you try to write about it. Stuff like kind of obvious, but it's nice to have it at hand when you're doing it. Create a timeline. If you're doing it yourself, you may not need this, but if you have a team that's working on it, create a timeline for preparing the report, including cutoff dates for certain inputs from different people. And then gather those additional things that you may want to attach to the reports. Gather those as well, because sometimes, if you're looking for news articles or well, I don't know, maybe photos from a workshop that you did 2 years ago, they might not be easily, somebody may have them somewhere and you need to get all that stuff together. So get it organized, analyze what you did. What did you get right? What worked? What didn't work? Did you overestimate in certain areas? Do some real analysis before you try to write this up. Think about your impacts. But when you're doing this, be transparent, right? When you actually start writing or preparing the reports, Vance said this in the introduction, but be constructive and honest at the same time, right? You can frame your maybe missteps in a constructive way. How do you learn from those things? But you need to be honest and candid. Tell them what you would do differently next time. They want you to learn, they want you to succeed, but they understand that not everything that you write on paper happens exactly as planned. Visualize. So this, again, limited what you can do on eCivis in the project report form, but think about creative ways that you can convey your results beyond the words that you write in these reports. You need to do this within the bounds of the agreement and in the reporting formats, but think about, are there things you could attach to really show the impacts of your project? Photos are great. Maps, maybe, might be relevant for some of you. And then graphics, of different kinds. Those are all things that they can help the CAL FIRE see what you've done rather than just read about it. And then again, as Vance said, this whole process, implementation through reporting, should be a learning process. So now that you're concluding your grant, spend some time with your team reviewing and learning from the results so that you can apply those learnings to other projects going forward. And lastly, you're going to share this information with CAL FIRE through the reporting process, but think about other ways you could use this information to serve other purposes, maybe for your communications or your annual report, or on social media or whatever. Just try to repurpose this, and so it serves more than one purpose. And I think, yep, that's it. Over to you, Regine.
Great. So I get to talk about the really exciting financial reporting aspect of closing out your grant. So just again, to reiterate, I think Chris mentioned it earlier, Vance did. Before proceeding, a couple of things. One is, once you go down this path of closing out, you cannot bill anything further to your grant, against your grant. So if there are any unspent funds within your grant agreement, those will be unobligated and will go back to CAL FIRE and to the state. Also, it's important for you to understand that once your grant is actually, once you submit your closeout, your CAL FIRE eCivis sort of portal will freeze. And once your grant is actually, your closeout is approved, you will no longer see in eCivis any of your past financial reports or activity reports. So I would encourage you to, if you haven't already, as part of just kind of keeping organized for your project, to go into eCivis, download and save all of your past financial and activity reports for your project in the event you're ever monitored by the state or audited as it relates to your grant with CAL FIRE. Okay, so basically there's kind of, as Chris went over earlier, there's two approaches to completing a closeout. One would be where you can complete and submit your financial report, your activity report in eCivis, and documenting sort of your final project activities and expenses. And then once those reports are approved, your CAL FIRE grant manager would then send you the project closeout form that Chris showed. You would complete that form, upload it into eCivis, and then complete sort of a dummy financial report wherein you basically enter all zeros, and everything is blank because you have already spent your grant. The other approach to closing out your grant is where one can request your project closeout form ahead of time from your CAL FIRE program manager. You can then complete the form. And then what you're going to want to do is first complete your activity report, because as I understand from one of the CAL FIRE program managers, I haven't had this happen to me personally, but he did share with me that if you don't complete the activity report first before completing your final closeout, basically, once you complete that final financial report, you cannot get back in to complete the activity report. So you would want to request a closeout form, complete your activity report, and then upload the closeout form and complete your final financial report. Either approach is acceptable to CAL FIRE. Some of their program managers have a preference for one approach or the other. For me personally, I've always taken the former approach where I have completed the final invoice and activity report, and then subsequently completed the project closeout form and sort of a dummy financial report. So either way is acceptable. For the purpose of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm assuming that kind of latter approach where you do it all at once. At any rate, you're going to go into your eCivis dashboard and select award closeout to begin the closeout process. It'll provide you a prompt asking if you wish to continue, and there's some language in there about basically remembering that any unspent funds will be unavailable for reimbursement after you submit this form. So you click OK, and let's see. Chris, can you move on to the next slide, please? Then we'll begin your final financial report. So your final financial report is basically just like you've done for every other invoice with CAL FIRE. This screen here just shows, again, it shows your grant information at the top. There's sort of a summary there of how much you've been awarded, how much you've spent to date. There's a field for entering your final reporting period. And that same field would be reflected on your actual invoice cover sheet form that one uploads. And then you'll see the different budget categories there. And for each budget category, there's a field for entering your various expenses. These should reflect what's on your CAL FIRE invoice form. So I'm assuming, is there anyone on this call who hasn't done a CAL FIRE invoice yet in eCivis? Okay, so I'm not going to bore you guys with all the sort of the details of the GL codes and adding rows, taking away rows, but suffice it is to say that this form, your final sort of financial report, is basically exactly the same as what you've done for every other invoice. And then also just a reminder, if you do take the approach where you complete your final financial report and activity report, and then you subsequently complete the project closeout form, if you were to take that approach, you would just enter all zeros for your spend and your match, because you have already submitted to CAL FIRE your final budget figures and received your final reimbursement has been processed. Just as Chris mentioned earlier, and I think I put a link into the chat, CAL FIRE's they have their eCivis Grants Portal user guide. There's a great section in there about how to complete your eCivis financial report, including information about filling in the GL descriptions, the GL codes rather, and the descriptions. Also, just kind of noting that in this form, there is a narrative section where grantee can enter any notes or pertinent information relating to your invoice. So if you have any particular nuances or things that you want to, just sort of document for your grant in its final financial report, you can utilize that narrative section of this invoice where you're on the screen with the final invoice or final financial report. Okay, next slide. And again, it's just typical with every other sort of invoice that you would have submitted. You'll need to upload your backup documentation as well as the actual CAL FIRE invoice cover sheet. Next slide. And again, this is kind of, I think, probably old news for each of you, but for each budget category in your financial report, you'll need to compile one PDF document for each of the different budget line items within your financial report. And each of those sort of packets should include your backup documentation, things like receipts, invoices, timesheets for that particular budget category. CAL FIRE has a certain protocol for naming your backup documentation. It should include, or it should start with your grant ID number, followed by your invoice number and the corresponding sort of budget category there. So contractual, travel, etc. Yeah, so you'll just, again, as you've done previously, for your final report, you'll just upload all that backup documentation. You'll also want to include backup documentation, not only for your expenses to the grant, but any matching contributions in your final report. Matching contribution documentation could include things like receipts, labor hours, rates, sort of description of work performed. For some projects, you may have equipment or supplies where the grant has paid part of that expense and the grantee has paid the balance of the expense. So you would just want to document on that backup documentation which portion of that expense is being paid for by the grant and which portion is counting as match. As always, retain all of your your backup documentation for audit purposes and in case you're ever monitored by the state. So I'm just going to stop there and ask if there's any questions that folks have. Okay, I'm not seeing any so far. It's very straightforward. Just basically mirrors how you conduct your financial reporting for the rest of your invoices. Next slide. So again, as is the case with past financial reports, you need to submit the invoice cover sheet for your grant, which basically is a one-page form where you kind of roll up all your expenses into the various budget categories for that final invoicing period. On here, I just showed two different invoice forms or two different examples of the CAL FIRE invoice form. As maybe some of you have already experienced, CAL FIRE is really particular about the dates that are listed in their invoice and financial reporting forms. So you'll want to, the dates that are listed shall encompass the dates for all work performed and items purchased. So for example, if you're invoicing for the period of say June 1st to June 30th, but somebody submitted an invoice for receipts to you for March 1st, all of your receipts and your dates worked must fall inside the invoice reporting period range. So in this case, what you would need to do is to adjust your date range so that you list March 1st to June 30th, which seems kind of funky, but CAL FIRE allows for you to have overlapping reporting periods. So your invoices should reflect that. Just the other thing to know, if you have fully expended your grant on your final invoice form, your total budgeted amount and your expenditure to date should basically be the same amount. Let's see, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay. Yeah, I think.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I had a couple expenses that actually didn't get paid till like January 2nd. And so do you think that matters? Like, what should I put on this final invoice? Because it was going to be like whatever that was, October through December.
Yeah, put it through. You want to make sure you put it at least through when you incurred those expenses.
Okay.
So you said if they were January 2nd, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of funky, but CAL FIRE, it's just some agencies don't like it that way, but CAL FIRE does like it that way. So you want to make sure that the end of your reporting period includes the date in which those expenses were paid.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say just to flag for you guys, so once you have completed your final activity report, you've completed your final financial report, once you submit those as part of your closeout process, the award dashboard will only show the buttons for viewing your award. And you basically can't get in there and access anything. So the pending task section is going to disappear. And that's it. So just make sure, kind of as Chris mentioned, he had that slide is, are you ready? Just make sure you're actually ready to submit and initiate that closeout period and submit the final report and final activity report, because it will freeze everything once you do that. And then once your closeout process and your documents have been approved, then you will no longer see anything in eCivis. You'll actually be able to see that you had a grant, but none of the backup documentation or previous reports will appear in eCivis. Okay, let's see, Vance, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Regine. Yeah, it's you would think that your history of grants would stay in there, but they disappear. So just a couple of resources here. If you go to the forestbusinessalliance.org website and click on the templates page, or just go /templates, we've got a number of templates. We'll be adding some from the closeout into this, and also probably in the future organizing this section a little bit more. But you can see an example of a budget that's useful for the CAL FIRE business and workforce development grants form. And then also there's the guide that right now we had some issues with the website. So this is hosted right now at 3point.xyz, but it's just /FBA guide. But there's a number of chapters in here essentially on how to write a business plan, how to run your organization, how to do planning, write proposals. There's several case studies. Jeff's organization is featured in here. Plumas Wood Fiber. Jeremy is about to be added with Forestry Collective, and there's also a Washoe tribe case study in there. And we'll be adding a grant closeout chapter as well. So with things that we've presented here today, along with things that we learn, especially getting feedback from you all that you learn as we go along with this or move forward with this. And then this recording we always post the recordings of the workshops on our YouTube channel. It's just Forest Business Alliance. If you just do a search for it, it's pretty easy to find. But it's also if you click on the workshops page of the website, there's a link to it there as well. So next, please, Chris. So again, just the website, and then we're always available for technical assistance if you want to go into more detail on anything we talked about today with any of us, just send an email to forestbusinessalliance@gmail.com and we'll set up a call or a one-on-one session with you, and we can answer your questions and sort things out. Or if we can't, we should be able to put you in touch with somebody that can. So that's part of the goal and the mission of the Alliance, is that we're technical experts in this, but we can't answer every single question. But we think we know everybody in the state that can. So we should be able to put you in touch with the right people. If we can't, then it can't be answered. Anyway, so with that, I'll open it up to questions if folks want to jump in and ask away.
It's a pretty straightforward process, I would say. And as long as you sort of have a certain comfort level with navigating eCivis's quirks, it's not going to be unlike what you've already done before for your grant. I think the main thing is just to make sure that you complete your activity report, and that financial report is the last thing that you do, because once you do that, it'll freeze everything.
So the project closeout report, I just have to request that directly from, I guess it's John McCarthy, really. I don't think there's anyone else that I've been coordinating with.
Yeah, so John would have that that form. And I know on one of the grants I've managed, a CAL FIRE Business Workforce Development grant, that particular grant manager wanted me to not do the all-in-one approach. So
ask him.
Yeah.
What he prefers.
So
Okay.
yeah, and I don't know if John has a preference or not, but yeah, they'll be able to supply you with that form. And
Okay.
it's really straightforward. And in that form, there's also the opportunity to provide feedback on eCivis itself. So I think many of you guys are probably in those early cohorts where you've been a guinea pig for eCivis. So providing feedback, I think, could be helpful also to CAL FIRE.
Not the most intuitive system, I would say.
Not by a long shot,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, I would just mention too, when thinking about analyzing your project for your final report, for what it's worth, the Forest Service, they were supposed to begin soliciting their wood grants. Yeah, word on the street was that they were going to solicit their wood grants by the end of December, and that grants would be awarded on their typical schedule, which would be in the spring of this year. It remains to be seen if and when those will actually be solicited, but going through this exercise of your final reporting could help you to be able to highlight some of the accomplishments that you've made in your project's development for say a wood grant application if you were to seek funding from the Forest Service. So there's some opportunities there, and just gathering photos and other documentation to be able to highlight that and use that in a future grant application.
One thing that I just thought of that might be helpful, but I wouldn't 100% advocate it, is Google has, I don't know if you guys have seen Notebook LM, but if you could probably upload all your reports to date and ask Notebook LM to summarize or to draw certain points. I wouldn't use what it produces as your report. I would rewrite it, but it might be a nice way to quickly get to a draft, and then I would rewrite, because it's usually fairly obvious, like what, when AI is writing stuff. But I wouldn't recommend using any other AI to write your reports. But Notebook LM is actually the one summary AI thingy that I've seen that does take notes or reports and does a fairly good job of teasing out the details or lessons and things like that. Or you can query the notebook that you have put together, and it uses that information specifically rather than drawing things online. So that might help your process or to speed things along. But again, don't use what it puts out to submit as a report. Make sure you rewrite it.
I have one kind of general issue to bring up, which is once you have closed out your grant, the grant is done, then to what extent do you have an obligation to make whatever information that you've gathered with your grant available to the public? So, for instance, I did a feasibility study. My closeout was really simple because, it was just billing the consultants. But I mean, I'm perfectly willing to, if somebody else wants to do what I'm doing, they might want to look closely at my feasibility study because it's going to detail the different financial aspects of running this type of business. I'd be happy to, give that to them. But I'm just curious what reflections people have about your actual legal obligations there. Is there any kind of process you need to go through? Does CAL FIRE have any specific expectations? Anything like that?
They've
Yeah.
been the business and workforce development program in particular has been pretty emphatic that any proprietary information, if you don't share it with them, you don't have to share it. It won't get shared publicly. And I don't think you're under any legal obligation or you don't have to share stuff, especially from, if any of it's like financial information, especially or proprietary. So yeah, sorry, Regine, go ahead. You had something to add as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to actually pull up my company's own grant agreement with CAL FIRE. There's probably some language in your grant agreement that
There's
may,
something there. I forget what
Yeah.
it is.
yeah, because I mean, CAL FIRE, Vance, you're right. They in terms of proprietary information, business financials, um, you can redact, at least one of the practices I've used is redacted that information from reports or the application itself or what have you. And stated that that information can be made available to CAL FIRE like verbally upon request. But in terms of like an actual study that's been produced for your project using state funds, I think I'm guessing, Jeff, there might be some language in the grant agreement that addresses that type of thing.
I think the program has also said that if there is any information, say from a report that you don't want public, then you don't have to submit that. You can choose to not submit that in your report, but I can't remember how John or Justin stated that you can still get the information from them, but it's just a matter of, if you submit it then becomes public. It goes into the public domain. So I mean that might be a bit of nuance and detail that's too much, but I think, like you said, Jeff, there could be businesses too that could benefit from the information and the what you learned from your feasibility study. So as long as you redact what you want, I don't see why you couldn't share that, but I don't think you're under really any obligation unless there's something in your agreement that states that you are.
Yeah, in my particular circumstance, I mean, my purpose is to try to help get biomass out of the forests, right? So if
Yeah,
somebody else wants to produce wood fiber substrate, I think that's a good idea, and there's plenty of
yeah,
market room for that. So, I'd be happy to tell somebody what I know about the different companies that manufacture the equipment and what I learned about the financial aspects of it. Um, where I would draw the line is that I wouldn't give someone my Rolodex. So, in other words, I've been in contact with a lot of different people in the horticultural
Exactly.
industry,
Yeah.
and that wasn't financed by the CAL FIRE grant. So, if they want to know, if they want me to do their marketing for them, they're going to find out. So, I mean, but my circumstances, as I'm describing, I think are pretty clear cut and obvious, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if other people run into circumstances with proprietary methods for producing something or other where this could
Yeah.
become more of a critical issue and could get sticky in certain circumstances. So, I just suggest that you think about that at the outset when you're applying for the grant, and in the midst of it, ask questions and make sure you know what's going to happen with whatever information you provide.
Yeah, definitely talk to your program manager about that as well before you
Yes.
submit anything.
Yeah, and I know I would just offer on a project I work on. You mentioned market research, Jeff, and in that as being in kind of not allowing making public your Rolodex. Um, there was a market research study that was produced. In this case, it was a Forest Service one of their wood grants, but it was funded through a wood grant. And in that case, we did not deliver the actual report. We reported that it was completed. We provided an overview of it, but didn't actually deliver the document itself due to its confidential nature. And that was accepted by the Forest Service. So kind of going back to Vance's point, as it then does not become part of the public record, and in that case, subject to the Freedom of Information Act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, you bring up a great point about thinking about these sorts of things for businesses, or even Jeremy, in your case, Laurel, for nonprofits who are producing products or have some sort of offtake there that can be proprietary.
Yeah, if you're taking public money, what obligation do you have to make what you've done, available to the public? It's a general issue. And the other thing I was curious about is, do we know when CAL FIRE is going to open up the next grant cycle?
I know they're working on their grant guidelines. I've had conversations with folks at Business Workforce Development about that. They originally anticipated soliciting grants sometime in Q1 of this year, but I'm not sure. That was in early January when I spoke with them about their grant guidelines. So I know they're working on it, and they were anticipating Q1. I haven't heard anything beyond that, and I don't know, Chris or Vance, if you have.
And the big question is, how big of a pot of money are they going to have? Last time they had $10 million and they received, what was it, 90 or $100 million worth of requests?
Yeah,
Hopefully a lot more.
yeah, I doubt it. They did not have a specific allocation for their program. They kind of are. They've gotten pretty good at rummaging up other funding from other sources to sustain.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So I anticipate it will be highly competitive. But the good news is, I mean, there is also funding that's been allocated for the Forest Service wood grants, whenever those programs are friendly solicited. So, there should be multiple funding opportunities at some point, I would imagine in the first couple quarters of this year.
Any other questions, comments, experiences with Closeout?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Vance said earlier. If you have specific questions or you need help with either your closeout, your reporting, or, you know, DJ, in your case with amendments, feel free to reach out to us. And there's a person on our team, she's not on this call here, but she knows eCivis inside and out. So, you know, some of those really more nuanced things, we can help you guys with if you need it. And if we don't know the answer, we can figure out who does. Great.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we'll end there. And thanks everybody for joining us today. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have other further questions or issues or anything like that in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Have a
Thanks
good
so
day.
much,
Bye.
guys.
Good day.
Bye.